obviously want to respect everybody's privacy on that matter. So for those just still joining, there will be prizes and we will give them away periodically throughout the session. So if you have to step out, you won't miss out. So one of the things that is really fun about this and that we decided to do this time is we decided that you probably are familiar with me. My name is Caroline Sommerfeld. I'm the founder and creative director, I guess you could call me now, of Ancient Arts, but a lot of our other staff are here tonight. And so I wanted them to be able to introduce themselves to all of you, because it's always fun to know who's behind the scenes. So who's helping dye the yarn? Who is that person that gives you all that fantastic customer service? Who are the people that actually get these patterns out of my head and onto paper? Who are the people that actually make the yarn look all pretty and usable instead of the tangly mess that comes out of a dye pot? So I thought it would be really fun to do that. And also I will admit that my co-dyer Stephanie did suggest it and I thought, brilliant. So without further ado, Steph, would you like to be the first person to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi there, my name is Stephanie and I am the assistant dyer to Caroline, and some of the yarns you are using tonight, if you're using one of our ancient art kits, I might have dyed some of that yarn in it. Thanks for joining us.
All right, Wendy, if you'd like to introduce yourself, that would be great.
I'd like to. There we are. Hi, I'm Wendy. I'm your customer service person. I'm the one that you talk to on the phone or ask questions of. And as far as I'm concerned, everybody in the knitting world are just friends I haven't met yet. I love this and I'm really excited to cast on, and I cast on 2 rows and then forgot what I was doing. So I think I'm just going to have to listen to the conversation tonight.
All right, Heather, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Heather. I'm the production manager and I make the yarn look pretty before it goes out the door. So I manhandle it before it comes to you, and then I put it in the box, and then between me and Emma, we make sure you guys get it. And then tonight I will be looking after the chat. So if you have questions that Caroline's not answering right away, put them in the chat and I'll try and either answer it myself for you, or I will try and put the reins on Caroline and get her to backtrack a little bit so we can talk about the questions that are coming up.
Thanks, Heather. And I see that Emma is here. Emma, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, that would be fantastic.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emma. I mostly take care of the shipping, so I get all your packages sent out to you. But I also step in and help Heather sometimes with a bit of twisting and getting the yarn all ready for you guys.
Thanks, Emma. And we have Jessie, our design coordinator, here tonight, and she's the one that gets my patterns out of my head and onto paper and, you know, all nice and accurate and stuff.
Hi, yes, I coordinate with the designers and with Caroline. I help to find designers sometimes who might be interested in working with us. I coordinate with the tech editors. I work on layout and all sorts of little miscellaneous things like that, and do my best to make sure the pattern's whipped into shape in time for all of you to enjoy knitting it. Thanks.
Thank you, Jessie. And now Dan, who has no camera, so you can't see his amazing haircut. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, everybody. It's really exciting to be at this event. I can't believe how many smiling faces are on this. So yeah, I'm Dan. I've been working together with Ancient Arts for the last 10 years, and I just love it. So excited to be here. So hope everybody enjoys the evening. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. You're still unmuted, by the way, just so you know, and I can't believe you didn't say anything about mountain bikes. What's going on here? So I can't tell if Vanessa is in the house or not. Can anybody see if she has managed to join us?
I don't see her here.
All right, so then we have no Vanessa tonight, but we were hoping that she would be able to join us, and she might pop in later. So Vanessa is another one of our production team, and she is part of making the skeins all pretty. So I hope you enjoyed actually putting some names and faces to the things that happen behind the scenes, because I know it always makes a difference for me to be able to see what people are doing and, you know, to just know who's there. It's kind of amazing when I think about how many years of experience in knitting we all bring together, because it's, you know, well over 100, which is like unreal and so cool all at the same time. I might admit to accounting for maybe half of that, but you know, that's still really neat that there's a lot of that much talent there behind the scenes ready to help out. So now that we've met everybody, we've had some introductions, guess what? I think we should do a prize. So what Heather is going to do is everybody who is actually in the session right now, she's going to go through the names and she's going to randomly draw somebody, and then she's going to announce who wins our first ebook. So she'll put that in the chat, and feel free to also unmute Heather and let us know who won. In the meantime, I'm going to line up a slideshow for you, because one of the things that's really fun is to see where some of the inspirations in a pattern come from. Good Lord, all of a sudden this thing has readjusted itself. You know how it is every time a computer updates itself, how it will then move everything around? My slideshow was at the top earlier today, and now it has moved somewhere. There we are. Okay.
All right, I'm going to interject while there's a quiet moment and say that Allison Moen is our first prize winner, and she won the ebook prize package. I'm going to put it in the chat. Allison, if you want to contact Wendy at sales@ancientarts, fiber.com, I've put it in the chat.
Okay.
We can make
Wow.
arrangements to get that.
Okay, thanks very much.
Yeah, congratulations.
Fantastic. Congratulations for sure. Lots of knitting there. Very exciting. So to start off, I wanted to show you some pictures of actual mosaics and show you where the colors in the shawl came from and where some of the motifs that I've used have come from, because I know people will know about various different things regarding Roman mosaics, but you don't really look at them with the same eye until you realize that I'm pulling specific elements out. So this is one that I thought was really neat, because this shows some of the most commonly used colors in Roman mosaics. And you kind of think of them as being sort of black and white or kind of beige or grayish, but they actually used a lot of different materials to construct their mosaics, and some of them were absolutely amazing in terms of color. But this particular section of mosaic shows you the most commonly used colors, which are reds, blues, an amber color, some beige, and some black. So if you look at the original shawl, that's exactly what I've chosen for my colors on it. And it's all based on something like this, where you see these particular colors being used in the mosaic. And you notice that the borders of these particular motifs, this is called a guilloche, which is kind of an interesting thing, but it's basically a twisty set of colors, strands wrapping around each other. And you'll see this used tons of times in Roman mosaics in various different shapes and forms, but you'll see this repeating sort of pattern. But I really love the shading on there. And it's like, we think that, you know, fading things in sweaters is new, but actually the Romans have been doing it for 2,000 years or more in terms of how they put their mosaics together. So you can see there's actually a fade in this particular mosaic, which I thought was so cool. This is another example of mosaic, and they'll use all sorts of different materials. So they might use blocks of stone, but you'll also find mosaics that are made out of ceramics or glass, and they can bring the most amazing colors into them when they do that. So you can see this is another geometric pattern here, and this has some really beautiful colors like some greens and so on. And those are again from various different choices of stones, but they did use in higher end mosaics things like glass. So check out the colors in this one. You can see that guilloche again in here, but you can also see that they did a lot of figurative mosaics, and those could be very, very elaborate. Mosaics were very much a status symbol, and they would be used for, you know, upwards of 100 years in a house. And as they would get more and more wealth, they would build onto the house and they would add more mosaics. But these were meant to be long-term status symbols, and quite a few of them told stories. This one is actually a modern reproduction, but one of the things that I really love about mosaics is that there's a lot of nature scenes in them, a lot of birds. And so one of the bands in this particular shawl incorporates a bird motif because I really enjoy seeing all the different birds that you'll find in the floors. This one is amazing for the color. Like, you think this had been made today because it's so bright. It's absolutely stunning. And again, these geometrics and 3D sort of effects, very exciting. You can find this on just plain old Wikipedia, this particular picture, and there's a lot of information on mosaics there. I really love this one because you've got some fantastic sea creatures in there. And this one in particular is supposed to be a dolphin, but you notice that use of the deep burgundy red and the white, and I have used those particular colors in my shawl, and I actually got the idea from this particular photo of this particular mosaic. And again, those interesting guilloche shapes. There's a cable that you can do that looks so much like this that I'm thinking to myself, I have to do another shawl based on these guilloche shapes and the fact that you could use cables. This one I left the identifying information because this is a Roman mosaic floor found in Israel. So mosaic floors, you can find them everywhere from the British Isles all the way across Europe, Northern Africa, and into the Middle East, and of course, places like Israel. This one, check this out. Take a look at this bird and how incredibly brightly he's colored. You can see wear on the surface there, but this is one of the ones that used ceramics and glass to get those very vivid colors. So his eyes there are just amazing. And, you know, if you think about it, that's 2,000 years old and wow, still a lot of punch. As you can tell, I was kind of obsessed with the birds in mosaics, but I just love the shading on them. It's so realistic. This was an unbelievable artwork form to me because it was so challenging, and yet the forms could be so realistic. This one is interesting because when you get to the center of this shawl, you'll see some geometric, sort of floral related shapes that are similar to this. So you would have a lot of flora and fauna, but they really did love their geometric shapes, and they could get quite complex and quite colorful. So this was one that I used in terms of picking a stitch pattern that would give me the feel of a floor like this. This is another one with a very simple guilloche, and again, that repetition of red and white. So you see a lot of that in Roman mosaics. And I left a little bit about this on the bottom, but I think I accidentally cut off where it's located. There's a lot of these that actually are photos of mosaics in Pompeii. Some of them told stories. So this one is quite something. And again, the elaborate colors and the beautiful borders on there. But I really liked the fact that it was a whole bunch of giant fish and then some boat that's probably really fleeing the giant fishes, about to eat them. And there's probably a lot of very scared sailors on there. So yeah, I thought this was a really neat sea scene. This one is just stunning again in terms of, you know, geometric, but also capturing elements that you would think would be quite modern. And I really like the checkerboard in that one band there, but you can again see this use of amber and burgundy reds and beige colors and blacks. And if you look off to the top right-hand corner, you can see that some of that is actually blue. So again, another inspiration point. This one, I just took a screenshot of it. You can do a simple search if you want to look at Roman mosaics and just take a look at all of the different figures there. So there's Alexander the Great, there's donkeys, there's fish, there's people having wars. You'll get a lot of exotic animals. You'll get zoo scenes and a lot of things like scenes from Roman legends about their gods and so on. This is another one when I was talking about inspiring the shapes in the center of the shawl that I used. I really like these geometric florals. I actually was going to embroider these onto the shawl, and then I thought, no, maybe you want to stop now because that could get a little complex for people to, you know, be doing at home. But I was so tempted to put those flower petals inside the geometric shapes in the center. This one I love, and I left the identifying information on it for you because this is one from Pompeii, and it's just got a lot of humor to it. It's in the entrance of one of the great houses, and it says in Latin, "Beware of the dog." Now, how fabulous is that they were putting dogs in their mosaics with "Beware of the dog"? So 2,000 years old, and you know, they still had dogs doing the same things we do today with them. But I love the extreme fineness of the mosaic on this one too, because this is only about 3 feet wide. So those are very, very small stones that they've used to make the mosaic. Another thing that you find a lot in Roman mosaics are these shapes like this that are often called Greek keys. So I have used some various different Greek keys in the shawl, and they come from these mosaics like this. One thinks of them as being Greek, but the Romans and the Greeks like to borrow things back and forth. So they did share a lot of their artistic inspirations, and they would borrow from each other all the time and then maybe just rename it and call it theirs. So Roman gods and Greek gods actually share an awful lot. They just have different names, which I find quite funny. This is another example of different types of Greek keys, and you can see this beautiful movement in the center and then this very stylized border. So again, in the shawl, I've tried to capture some of that movement. The twisted ribbons section is definitely one of those ones that's trying to capture the movement in some of these different patterns. So again, you can see in this screenshot, very geometric shapes and then very organic shapes. And I really like that ram there in that one. Very, very cool. Again, this thing with birds and stars, but borders would be quite elaborate and fun. And I was very tempted as well to put that wave border in, but that would have had to use stranded color work. So I left it out because I figured, well, we have enough with just the mosaic in there. So that gives you a little bit of an idea about where the inspiration came from for the shawl and where the colors came from. So you could see them in those tiles and you could see how they put them together. And so this shawl is actually a walk around a Roman villa. So you're looking at the different types of mosaics, the different colors they would use, the different kinds of patterns and borders. I had a lot of fun with that. So that brings us to color choices for when you're knitting this shawl. And one of the things that's super important is because there's mosaic in there, you need to have some contrast. If you don't have the right contrast in some of the sections, then you're just not going to see the pattern as strongly as you might like. So if you're just choosing your colors now and you haven't started or you're worried about your color choices, I wanted to give you a couple of tips. And one of them is you're going to need 2 light colors, 1 medium color, and 2 dark. And if you're not sure about whether they're light or dark, then what you want to do is take a photo of them with your cell phone and make the photo black and white. And that'll tell you if there's contrast in terms of the light and dark there. If you use 3 colors that are kind of a medium shade, then you're not going to see the mosaic. You're not going to see this part in the blue there as well, because this is actually a fairly light blue and it's combined with the black. So light and dark show up in that part of the shawl. And the other place where it becomes important, as I just take it off, is you see this red and white border here. So you need a light and a dark for that. So this center panel looks kind of medium-ish to dark, but when you use a camera on black and white setting, you can see it's actually much, much darker than the gold there. So the gold is the medium color, and then you have 2 lights and 2 darks. And that's what gives you this really, sorry, somebody's unmuted. If you could mute your microphones right now.
Getting input.
Anyway, so that gives you the really clear patterns there. Now, if you prefer more subtlety, then you can certainly have less contrast in these panels. But if you want it to really look like those gorgeous floors that we saw there, then you'll definitely want to have that contrast. Substituting yarn. You absolutely can substitute yarn. A couple of tips if you're doing that. Try to stay away from a superwash yarn, because what's going to happen is that instead of having the body to stick and make your mosaic easy so that your strands aren't, doing anything rude on you, it could be slithery and slip around. So if you're not familiar with mosaic type knitting, then you might find it's a little more challenging. Dan, your microphone is on, please mute yourself. And then the other thing that you need to remember is that there's stretch and sag, and superwash will grow a lot. So if you want your shawl to hold its shape, you're better off with a non-superwash yarn. I don't expect everybody to be buying the actual yarn that it was knit in, because let's face it, we all have a lot of stash. So these are just a couple of things that I was thinking about that would make it easier for you to use, to knit rather. I did use our yarn, and one of the reasons why I chose it was because it is a bit of a rustic yarn. And so that means that the strands will stick to themselves because they're just a little bit fuzzy. And so that makes tensioning things really easy because they're not slithering around and they're not trying to squinch together on you and so on. It just makes it that much nicer to knit. Now, I've had a lot of people messaging me and asking me about skill level. This is technically rated as an intermediate shawl, but it is nowhere near as horribly confusing as you might take when you first look at it with all these busy pieces. Each section is knit independently, and each section is not actually a terribly difficult technique. So there's a lot of texture stitches that are just knits and purls. And then there's a little bit of slip stitch, which is in this fresco section here, but it's very simple slip stitch. And then there's the mosaic, which is only ever going to use one color at a time. So the entire shawl only uses one color at a time, so you don't have to worry about trying to control a whole bunch of things at once. So for those of you who might be a bit more of an adventurous beginner, I think you're still going to be fine and you're going to get a lot of support throughout the process. Okay, so I think we've talked about the inspirations, but one of the things that I wanted to mention is I've also had a couple of people ask me, why this shape? And one of the reasons for the shape is that I like to wear shawls in the car. I like to wear them when I'm sitting at my desk, and I don't want them to get snagged on things. And one of the problems with a classic triangle shawl is that they do that. They get caught under stuff. The end falls off my shoulder and then it gets rolled onto the wheel. And I actually had one that's triangular that I was wearing today that got stuck in the wheel and I'm dragging it out later. So this shape is meant to be really wearable without getting caught in stuff. And it's long enough from tip to tip that you can wrap it around yourself nicely. You can tie it in a knot. You can style it in various different ways, but it's meant to be more user-friendly, shall we say. You can treat it like a stole as well as a shawl. So that's why it has a different sort of shape. I also like playing with shawl shapes and doing things that are unexpected. And one of the things about a great big shawl that is unexpected but unpleasant is like, there you are, you're knitting Stephen West's fantastic speckle and pop shawl, and your rows are 1,000 stitches long, and you're like, oh my God, I'm never going to get through one, let alone a bunch. Most of this shawl does not exceed 100 stitches per row because those big long rows kind of suck. So only the border has long rows to be completed, and there's not so many of those. So the border goes up to start, I think it's at 462 stitches, but it's not Stephen West length. And you don't have to do it through the whole shawl because that's one of the downfalls for me with great big classic triangular shawls. So it gives you a really wearable shape, but it also means that you're not going to be stuck with those enormous long rows for too much of the shawl. All right, do you believe that it is now time to give away another prize? So this time we're going to give away a nifty notion kit, including a chance to try a wonderful ebony lantern moon needle and fix-it tool. So Heather is going to draw from all of the people that are in this session, and she will announce who has won, both in the chat, and she will break in and talk to us too. I noticed somebody mentioning that they like that the yarn is a DK, and I agree, because it gives you a nice squishy warm shawl without being insanely warm, and it also means it gets knit a little faster too. Sneaky. So while Heather is doing the draw, I am going to get my notes ready here. So one of the things that I want to do is go through this pattern and give you a few tips along the way. So when we start looking at the pattern, you're going to notice that on the very second page in there, right after the cover, there's a bunch of things called construction overview and design notes. I really suggest that you want to read through those because they do tell you some of what you're going to need to understand as you go through and work the shawl. So it explains how the shawl is knit and the kind of things that you're doing in each section overall. So the shawl starts off and you're going to knit this piece in the center, not this border with the red and the blue there. You're going to knit the piece in the center first, and you're going to knit it from one tip to the other. So for a while, as you go, the shawl is going to be increasing. Then you're going to get to the center section where it will stop increasing, and that happens here. It stops at the end of this blue border. It stops at the end of this gold border and it starts at the blue border there where your second blue border with the birds, and it no longer increases. So it's a nice straight rectangle for a while. And then as you keep going, when you get to the next gold section, you're going to start decreasing. So you have some shaping on the shawl, but it's just on one side where you're increasing for a while, and then on the other side, you're going to decrease for a while. So it's fairly simple shawl shaping. This is one of the reasons why it's not as complex as some shawl styles are, because you're not having to pay attention to, my God, I'm increasing here and here and here and there and different amounts in different places. You're only ever going to increase one stitch at a time, and you're only ever going to decrease one stitch at a time. All righty, Heather has our winner.
Yeah, so Nancy Harrington has won our first prize pack for the Notions pack. And contact Wendy. I think Wendy's actually writing down your name. I can see her on the screen. Yeah, you get to try out the lantern, the new stitch or the new needles that we got. Everyone that has tried them so far has really liked them. So you'll have to let us know and give us a little bit of a review on how you think they perform.
I will admit that I was really sorry that I didn't buy a set of them for myself because they sold out poof and I didn't get one. And I was like, oh my God, but I tested them and they were really, really, really nice. So, you know, I do hope that the winners enjoy those. So going back to our tips and tricks, there's something that I also wanted to point out, which is that the edges on both sides of the shawl are slipped. So that means the first stitch of each row is slipped. You will knit it, the end stitch of each row, but then when you turn your work and go back, you'll slip that stitch as well. And I always get questions about stuff like this, like, why did you do that? That's kind of a pain in the butt later on because you have to pick up stitches. And I'm like, well, it's actually there because I do have a background in doing things like sewing. And this is like giving the shawl a selvage. The slip stitches provide some body and they reduce the amount of elasticity on the edge of the shawl. And what that does is it means that over the years, as you wear this shawl, it's not going to sag. It's going to hold its shape and give it structure. So I know some people don't like to slip the stitch on the edge, but I strongly recommend that you do because it will keep your shawl holding its structure. So you see it's a little bit stretchy, but it isn't going to sag horribly, especially if you've chosen a superwash yarn and you're like, okay, it'll grow a little bit. That's no big deal. Just make sure you slip that edge because that will help you to retain the structure in the shawl. So that means that when you're holding it up, it's not going to sag down and it's not going to sag lengthwise and so on. So that slip stitch edge is there for a good reason. It's not just something weird that I've put in, it's there with thought.
Miss Caroline, we have one quick question.
Yes.
Someone's done the combo number 3, but they've used the Irish linen for the main color. Is that correct? And then we do have, yes, I think, some projects. Emma and I were looking, we do have some projects that are already knit up that are similar to kit 3 or are in kit 3. So they should be able to see them if they go to our Ravelry page.
Oh, I see. Yeah. So yeah, the main color on all of them, what does this one say? Yeah, the main color is the Irish linen. So the main color is the lightest color that you've got. And that's the one that shows up here at the tips. And turning it to the right side there, it's the one that shows up here as the light color there, and it shows up as the light color on the I-cord border. It's not a disaster if you change that though. The only thing that you have to worry about is making sure that you have contrast in each of these sections. You can change your colors around as much as you want, and it would be possible to knit this shawl with more than 5 if you want to do some stash busting. So now we had a question about the various different sections of the shawl. So this will be really interesting to see if I can remember them. There are quite a few because it's knit in little modules. And that, again, I think keeps it interesting and it also helps to provide structure. So this is a really simple knit purl pattern. It's really a broken rib, and this is a tesserae section. This one here is a fresco. And that's based off when you look at Roman frescoes. And you know what? I actually have a picture and I can't resist showing it to you of the frescoes. So if you look at this is wall painting. So these are painted onto wet plaster and they last, as you can see here in this picture from Pompeii, 2,000 years or more. And this little section of the shawl is inspired by, you see the borders around these panels, and you see that they have kind of striping effects, and then they're made to look like there's carvings and so on in those borders. So that's why this is a slip stitch section. And that's meant to emulate those fresco borders. And the red on each side is because they often used red for those big wall panels. They had a very different color aesthetic from us for their walls. It was always like really vibrant and bright and, you know, good Lord, we would find it stressful, but they did like their color. Then we have another section again of the broken rib, which is this tesserae. And then we get into the first mosaic section, which is, I don't remember what I called it because I'm blanking out because I'm getting old. Mosaic key band. Yeah, because it's a Greek key style band. So I kept the names fairly simplistic. This is the twisting ribbons. And this section is meant to emulate those guilloches. You remember those nice twisting patterns? So you can see that you've got things moving in there, but it's just done with a very simple stitch. Then we get to another mosaic panel, and this one is a bird. And you can see those birds in the mosaic. The center panel is this one where you've got these geometric sort of floral shapes. And then it repeats the same sections reversed on the other end of the shawl. So because somebody is a little bit OCD, she had to rechart everything so that your birds are facing each other and everything is reversed so that it's balanced and harmonious. So each side will look the same because they've been flipped around so that they just flow nicely from one end to the other. So that's why there's so many sections in there, is that I did definitely rewrite each section to make sure they were flipped so that you would have a nice balanced appearance. All right, so one of the other things I wanted to mention is that gauge is going to be important on this shawl because one of the colors is almost completely used up. I had only 6 grams left of this gold color. Now, it is not a disaster if you run out of this color. It's not a big deal. If you find that you're a bit off gauge and your shawl is getting bigger, then where you're going to run out is when you pick up stitches for your border. So we're going to hold this up and you can see there is 2 rows of gold here and 2 rows of gold here. Now, enough of my test knitters were running low on yarn. And when you get to this part of the pattern, I'm just warning you now, the pattern actually has you doing those 2 rows in the red because there's lots and lots of red left over, but not so much gold left over. So I had 6 grams of yarn left. We actually put that as the 3rd contrast color just to make sure that people wouldn't run out halfway through those rows. But it is important to do gauge because of that one color. The rest of it, you will have plenty of yarn left over in each color, and you probably would have enough to make yourself a pair of like hand warmers or maybe even a hat, depending on how tightly you knit. So save your yarn because you would be able to make something that matches the shawl, but it is important to watch your gauge because of that one color. So it's called contrast color 2 in the pattern, and you definitely want to keep an eye on that. But like I say, we got your back on this, and we did write CC3. When you get to that place where a lot of people would run out of yarn, you can change it and make it like the original and use CC2, but it does say CC3 to protect you from the horrors of having to frog back 462 stitches. That sucks. Okay, now a little review for those who are unfamiliar with Mosaic Stitch. Mosaic is a really simple way of doing 2 colors. And this is, Dan, where I'm going to ask you to spotlight my little camera here. Perfect. So Mosaic uses only 1 color at a time, and it's done with slipping stitches. So it looks very complex. It looks like you're doing all this fancy pants stranding, but you're actually not. You're only working with 1 color. Each row is worked with 1 color, and you work 2 rows at a time of that color. So every single time that you've changed colors, you will knit 2 rows with the color. Mosaic can be knit as both garter stitch and as stocking stitch. And if you look at the border here, that's red and white, I actually did do that. So some of them are stocking stitch and some of them are garter. If you don't like the idea of doing it as a stocking stitch, knit it all as garter. I've seen people finish the shawl and it looked just fine in garter. The only thing is that what you'll get is a little bit of a difference in how it pulls in. So you'll get a difference, a little bit of waviness, but it's going to look fantastic and it's very easy to do. So when you start off, you're going to have, and I've got a little sample here, and oh my God, my strings are everywhere. Doesn't help to have a small sprite cat helping you with this when you're setting up. So when you start off, you're going to have garter stitch, and you're going to have your first 2 rows knit in the color that you'll be slipping in the next row. So when you're doing this, what is all this slipping and how are you carrying these colors? Well, we're going to start off and we're going to knit a row in the gray because the last 2 rows were in the pink, and now we can slip some stitches to create a mosaic pattern. So I'm just going to do that. Good Lord, that's a long cable. Now, when I get to a place where my pattern might tell me to slip a stitch, can you guys see this? Because it looks really fuzzy to me. There we go, it's auto-focusing. You are always, when you work mosaic stitch, going to slip purlwise. So that means you put your needle through the stitch as if to purl, and then you slip it to the right-hand needle, and then you just go on and knit the next stitch. You'll have a chart or the written instructions for the chart to follow to tell you which stitches to knit and which to slip. And in the charts in this particular pattern, I wanted to make it as user-friendly as possible. So there is a symbol in each and every stitch that you have where you're going to be slipping. So again, to slip a stitch, we're going to just slip purlwise and move it to the right-hand needle. Now, One of the things I wanted to point out to you about the colors that I am using is you notice how they're just a tiny bit hard to see on the needle. That's because these colors actually don't have very much contrast. So I wanted you to see what it looks like when there's not so much contrast. If you take a photo of these two and you do a black and white photo, they don't look very different. One of them is Damascus Steel and the other one is Scent and Sensibility, which is a pinky purple. They're very pretty, but in Mosaic, they are not as noticeably different from each other as they could be. And I would love to show you, I would love you to see me doing this continental, but I suspect it's more than my poor little brain can handle tonight because I am not a continental knitter and I'm just making this up as I go so that we can get to the next part of the row or the end of the row. So all the stitches that we want to continue up to form a pattern in the pink will be slipped and the rest of them will all be knit. So one of the things is when you're slipping those stitches, what do you do with the yarn as you're going? Well, the yarn stays in the back. So the yarn that's being carried when you're slipping a stitch will stay in the back and you barely see it. So there's one of the places where it has been slipped. And one of the things that you're going to do is as you knit this is you're going to space your stitches on the right-hand needle so you don't end up with your strands going clump and being really, really tight. When you knit the second row, it's always going to be exactly the same as the first. So you repeat every row twice when you're knitting, and they are all charted out for you in this pattern, so you don't have to worry about that, but that's how Mosaic works, is that you always knit each row twice because you're only using one color at a time. So when we go back the other way, we're going to knit again because this is garter stitch. And I'm going to hope that this camera can focus a little better here. So I'll hold still and let it do its little thing. Come on, camera. We've come to a stitch that was slipped on the previous row. Let's get this right up close. And you can see blurrily that gray that's over the pink stitch. That is the yarn that was held behind the work as I slipped the stitch on the previous row. In this case, we want those to always be on the back. Mosaic is not double-sided, it is one-sided. So you have a right side and a wrong side, and all of those strands, when you're slipping a stitch, end up on the back. So when you go back, when you're on the wrong side row, you're going to slip your stitch with the yarn in front. When you did the first row on the right side, you slip your stitch with the yarn in back. So how am I going to handle this now? My yarn is in the front. I am now going to knit the next gray stitch because I'm doing everything exactly the same as the previous row. Just move that yarn to the back of your needle and knit like normal. I want to warn you of something that freaked me out the first time that I did Mosaic knitting, which is that you notice that the strands look like they're a different length on the back of the knitting there. It's going to look like that because the yarn is actually the same length in terms of how it's carried, but your yarn is going between the stitches on the needle. So it always looks smaller, it looks shorter. Don't be weirded out by that. This is just fine. So as we knit, we come to another stitch that's been slipped. We move our yarn to the front because I'm working a wrong side row. We slip the stitch. And remember what I said about spreading your stitches out on your right-hand needle so it doesn't pull in? This is the time where you spread them out and then you go on to your next stitch. So that will give you enough of a strand on the back that everything is going to be nice and smooth on the front and you're not going to have your stitches pulling in. If you don't do that, then what you get is a pucker. So we'll slip this one and then we will not spread the stitches out. And you see how these two are now sitting up tight and close and getting real personal with each other and you can't even see the strand there? If that happens to you, pull it. You can just work it loose. So if you've already slipped the stitch and knit the next one and you realize that you pulled it too tight, you can just pull it apart. I'm going to continue on, and I'm actually going to create a mistake that's really common for people learning Mosaic here. And that is forgetting to move the yarn to the back or to the front or leaving it in the wrong place. Don't you love the sound effects of knitting? So I'm going to make this boo-boo and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to fix it for you because it's really, really simple to do. So I've come to the right side of my work and you can see my slipped stitches. And then there's a couple here that are kind of hiding because, oh my goodness, my yarn is on the wrong side of the work. This is so simple to fix. I was just going to knit up to that stitch. Oh, actually, we'd be switching colors at this point in time because we've done 2 rows of gray, so we're going to do 2 rows of pink. So we're going to knit up to this and we're like, oops, I did something wrong here. Now I did two different mistakes for you so you could see that one of them is I knit the pink stitch by accident. If that happens, just drop it. And this is a stitch. Oh my God, there we are. This is a stitch that was just being slipped. So all you have to do is pick the gray yarn out of the stitch, put it back on the needle, and now it's all fine. It's exactly where it should have been before. So I knit it when I shouldn't have. I should have slipped it. So all you have to do is drop the stitch, ravel it down one row, and put the stitch back on your needle, and we're all good to go. As you're going with the next color, you're going to be knitting that stitch and everything is fine. It all looks good. So that's just one kind of mistake that you can make. The other one is putting your yarn on the wrong side of the needle. All you have to do here is just flip it over. All fixed. So I know that this is a little hard to see, but did that make sense for everybody? So these are the most common kinds of mistakes that you'll make in mosaic knitting, and they are very easy to fix. Mosaic is very forgiving. Now, if you get done your entire pattern and you realize you made a boo-boo, duplicate stitch is your friend. So I do have a scarf pattern that I published and it has mosaic in it. And I will admit to you that the knit sample with this beautiful big Celtic knot of mosaic knitting had a mistake in it. I had actually missed one of my stitches and I hadn't slipped it when I should have. So I went back and I used duplicate stitching to fix that, and I can't find it myself. So if you make a boo-boo in your pattern and it's too far to tink back, you don't want to do that, you can always fix it with duplicate stitch later. So mosaic is hugely forgiving and not difficult to work. It's just a trick of remembering to space your stitches and knowing that there's a couple of things that you might do as a boo-boo, but they're not hard to fix. So if you get the yarn on the wrong side of the needle, just move it over when you get to that stitch or stitches. And if you accidentally knit a stitch that should have been slipped, you can just drop that yarn out of it and put it back on the needle. So those are the most common things that you'll find yourself doing. And so you won't have a huge amount of trouble now that you have heard about those. All right, prize number 3, before we get into the other demo of a stitch in here that I want to show you about. So Heather, you're going to draw the next ebook of everybody that is in the room. I feel like I should have like a recorded drum roll here.
All right, I have Linda Archibald as the next winner of the ebook prize pack. I will put in the chat the contact information for Wendy, our salesperson, and we can make arrangements to make sure you get your prize.
Great, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, so the next tip that I want to give you is on this section. So this is twisted stitches. Wow, did that camera ever turn it a fun color? These are really fun because they give you a way to move stitches around on the surface and create texture without having to do anything too complicated and crazy. So here's another part of the shawl. This is the center, and you can see these stitches rise above all the rest of them and they form patterns. So here's our geometrics that I was talking about that I really love in those Roman mosaic floors. So these stitches are called twisted stitches, but super secret, they're actually a teeny tiny little cable stitch. So they are 2-stitch cables. Normally 2-stitch cables, you have 2 stitches on one side, 2 stitches on the other, and they cross. This is a 1x1 cable. So they're actually listed in the pattern both as a 1x1 left twist or 1x1 right twist, but that's what they are, is they're a little teeny tiny cable. So there's 2 ways that you can work them. The pattern gives you instructions on how to do them, and it has you knitting the 2 stitches in such a way on the needle so that they'll cross over without you having to use a cable needle. But on a swatch that looks really good up close to me, but not so great on the document camera, you can see this stitch here. I did a left cable and it's going off to the left. And this one is as it's written in the pattern, and they are identical. It's exactly the same thing. So I worked this one with a cable needle, and I worked this one by knitting the 2 of them on the needle and then just slipping to the right. And here we have the right twist. This one is worked, and you can see that little stitch leaning right. exactly as it's written in the pattern, where you work the 2 stitches on the needle. And then this one here is worked with a cable needle. And again, they lean in exactly the same direction. So if you read through the instructions on there, and I am going to knit these so you can see them, but if you read through it and you go, that is breaking my brain and I don't like it, then just substitute working it as if it was a cable, because it will look exactly the same on the front of the fabric. So when we look here, what's going on is that we have reverse stocking stitch, making the ones that aren't twisted stand out. And then when they move, these are just little teeny tiny 1 stitch cables, 1 stitch on each side. So one tucks under the other or tucks over the other. So they're just simple, simple little cables. Nora Gahn has an entire book of these, and it looks enormously complex, but they're actually super simple. So I will demonstrate how to do that. And there is, like I say, the instructions in the front of the pattern. So I'm going to read them out as I do this, because I know that this is one of the things that I've had a few questions from people who are a little less experienced on, and I just want you to see how it goes. Thankfully, I do not have as long a needle on this, or a cable on this needle, because boy, oh boy, that was a bit silly of me. Let go. I keep doing my swatch samples in bulky because our wonderful production person, Vanessa, has been making the most stunning hats out of our bulky yarn. So this is an excuse for her to get a new skein of yarn. So to work a left twist stitch, the instructions say slip 1 knitwise, slip 1 knitwise. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to put it into the first stitch on the left needle as if to knit. And then I'm just going to slip it off onto the right needle. Then I'm going to do that again a second time. And then the instructions say place both stitches back on the left needle. So I'm just going to put the left needle through those stitches and slide them back over. That turns them on the needle, and now they're ready to have things done to them. So what it says next is knit into the back of the second stitch on the left needle. Leave the first stitch on the needle. So that's what we're going to do. You see that? We're just knitting into the back of the stitch, and it's a normal knit stitch. Don't take the stitches off the needle. The next step is to knit into the back of both stitches together. So you've now knit into the back of both stitches together, and then you just pull them off the left needle. And what that did was it crossed them over each other. Kind of cool, huh? It means you don't have to have a cable needle and you don't have to slow down or stop. So if you were going to do that normally with a cable needle, doing it as a little teeny cable, what you would do is you would take your cable needle, you would take 1 stitch, put it on your cable needle, knit the second stitch that's left on the needle, the next stitch. Then you would pop your first stitch back on or knit from the cable needle itself. And lo and behold, they are exactly the same thing. I'm hoping you guys can see that. So you see how they look exactly the same? 1 stitch has moved to the left. So one is a method that has been developed to allow you to move the stitches easily without having to stop and use a cable needle. There is a third way that you can do this, which is to just pull the stitch off the needle, knit one, and put the other one back on. But that's a good way to have your work suddenly go zoom. So a lot of people don't like doing that. When we want to work the right twist, it's exactly the same thing in terms of what we're going to do, is that we're going to leave the stitches on the left-hand needle while we do them. So on a right twist, we're going to knit 2 together, but we're not going to pull them off the needle. We're going to leave them there. Then what we're going to do, and it says this, knit the first stitch only. So this is the first stitch on the needle because we haven't moved them around or anything. So we just knit that stitch, and now we can pull the 2 off. And you can see that there's now a stitch leaning right. So this is a really simple way to do a simple little cable with just 1 stitch going under and 1 stitch going over. You can do this with 2 stitch cables. So 2 stitches in each direction. There are ways to do this as well, which is kind of nifty. Now, if we were working this normally as a cable, we would take our first stitch, put it on our cable needle, hold it to the back of the work, knit the next stitch on the needle, knit the stitch that's sitting on the cable needle, and we would have our stitch that's moving right. So do you see how we have 2 stitches, one by this thumb and one by this thumb, that both lean right? So this is, as I say, just a simple way to do a cable that is much less complex and means that you'll keep on moving. The other thing that I noticed about it is that they tend to stand out a little bit more. They tend to pop up a little more from the fabric, which gives them really nice definition. But honestly, the only difference is that it's intended to make it fast and easy for you to work. So if those hurt your brain, you don't have to do them. Use a cable needle and just do a simple little tiny left cable, right cable. So if it says LT, it's a little tiny left cable. If it says RT, it's a little tiny right cable. So those are the majority of the things that I wanted to cover in terms of tips and tricks for this particular Zoom session. And this now is a chance for everybody to unmute, ask questions, and we are also going to draw our last prize. So Heather, this is another needle and notions pack.
Yep.
I will let you do that. And while she is doing the draw, if anybody has questions, please feel free to ask at this point.
Hi, I got my kit this week and I love it. I've started and it's going really well, but my colors are much darker than yours.
You know what? It's just the light. That's actually the exact same yarn as mine. It's just the fact that I've got big lights beaming down on me that you can't see. I think I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lights shining on it. So it looks really light. The other thing is this is a really interesting yarn. And when you photograph it, it ends up looking very light in the photos. So the blue looks darker and the beige color that you've got, it looks much whiter. And you know, it's just kind of interesting because I think that what it has to do with is the blend of the two wools and how light hits them. Cameras have a really hard time with certain types of things, and heathered yarns are often something that makes a camera have a conniption. So it is the same color, and if you take a picture of it, you'll see it's going to look very yes, okay. I do see I have a photo bomber back there.
I was just expecting the linen one to be much lighter, but yeah, it's working really well anyway.
Great. So, you know, the interesting thing is too, that once you've got these contrasts around it, it's going to look lighter just because it's got dark set beside it. So I've knit things out of just the linen color itself. And it actually, when it's just a plain sweater, it really does look darker. It's all about how your eye will read colors. And in the case of the pattern and the photos, it's about how cameras also read them, and they'll introduce contrast. So hang in there. It's going to look more and more like the original as you go, but it will have a little bit more earthiness than the photos, because no matter how great our photographers are at tweaking the colors, cameras just can't pick up that heathered nature of the yarn. That's actually one of the things that was really fun for me using this yarn, is that I'm using as an inspiration something that was created 2,000 years ago. And one of the wools in the yarn for the original is from a sheep that would have been around in those times. So some of the floor mosaics that I showed you are actually from Britain. And these sheep would have been happily trundling about at that point in time, being Bronze Age, Iron Age type sheep with very little difference. So it kind of adds for me a little bit of that feel. So are there any other questions? Feel free to ask.
Yes, I
Caroline,
have a question.
Caroline, I just wanted to know, so every time you change color, do you weave in the ends at the back?
Excellent question. So, and I had meant to say something about that and I didn't. What I'm doing is I'm just carrying the colors in these mosaic sections up the side. Let me see if I can figure out which direction to show it to you. And what do I mean by that? So you just pick up each color and you work with it. And what it'll give you is a wee tiny loop. See the wee tiny loop there? Going up the side of the shawl. It won't be in your way and it won't really show. So I'm going to show you in actual person here what that looks like.
Okay, but if you break the yarn, like after session one.
Don't break the yarn, because you're going to end up then having a ton of ends to weave in. So on this,
wouldn't you break the yarn on the big sections?
Yeah. So Dan,
the pattern said to break
the document camera. That's not me. There we go. Okay. Wow, that is just terrible lighting. I don't know why it's being so cantankerous today. It was so good with the last class I taught. So each time that I'm going to change color, I've knit my 2 rows and I'm ready to change the color. I'm just going to pick the strand up from beneath the one that's come back and start knitting with it. You couldn't see that because my fingers were in the way. So I'll just pick this strand up and I'll start knitting. And this is the one where I picked it up previously. You see that little tiny loop there by my finger? So this won't show because I've actually picked it up several times here. So I've picked up the gray and I've picked up the pink, and you can see how there's almost nothing showing on the edge. Do you see those? So this is what's known as carrying them up the side. So don't break your yarn. The only reason why there's an extra strand here is these are where I joined the colors in initially. So let me just come back here and show you that in real time. Come on, you. Knit, knit.
Okay, but I just want to know, so you have, sorry, can you hear me?
Yep.
So,
I can hear
but
you.
in the pattern, you say in the pattern, it says break yarn. So we should ignore it every time it says that?
No. So I was thinking that you were asking about the mosaic. So in the mosaic, you don't break the yarn, but where it does tell
Yeah,
you
no,
break
that
the
I get. Yeah.
When in general you're working with yarns like this and you're doing multiple colors, I prefer not to go more than 4 rows without weaving in an end or doing something to catch that in, because right now here, I'll bring this yarn up to knit again, and you can see there's not a very big loop going to be formed there. So that's okay. But if you carried it up, say 6 rows, you're going to have a loop about that long, and that can be something that can be snagged. So what you would do is start twisting them. But if you're going from here on the shawl all the way up to here, you definitely don't want to carry that yarn because you're going to have a lot of twisting and it gets thicker along this edge. It could also be this too. So there you do want to break them. So the pattern will tell you where to break them. And in mosaic, you don't. So when you're doing the actual mosaic itself, no breaking the yarn. Once you're past the mosaic band, yes, do break the yarns.
Okay.
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. All right, if you want to unspot like that, Dan, that's great. So next question.
I had a question about the colors, and I would have knit them in your colors, but I haven't received my order yet. So I thought be creative and at least start, because that's important to me. So I did my little sample patches, and then I did a, this is what it's going to look like. And then I realized that my pink and shale are too close together shade wise, which is exactly what you said about the contrast. So I think I'll go darker and get that better contrast. That's in your red and white section. So,
yes,
I got there in the end. Not that I've only just started the tiniest bit, but I got there in the end because I didn't know that black and white tip. That was great. Thank you. And I mean, would you agree with that?
I'm really glad it helped. And you can use that like anytime that you're worried about contrast in your knitting. It's just such a fabulous tip. And I use it all the time whenever I'm trying to put colors together, because sometimes you can't tell whether or not they're darker or lighter than each other, but the camera will always tell you.
Okay, thanks.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, so all my colors together. Oh, just so you're actually there. I've got them all wound. So my fifth, I've got the verdigris and the whatever the pinky color is, and the natural and the wrought iron. And then I'm introducing this more with what I thought was shale, but is now going to be pewter. But that's that 5th color, and that's the middle panel at the back that you've got is red. So it's really important to get that color right, otherwise I'll hate wearing it because that's such a big piece, right?
Exactly. So, and one of the things too is with color placement is just think about where those colors will be when you wear the shawl. Like when I wear this one, the red is mostly in the back, but I need a color on these 2 parts with the twisting ribbons that's not going to make me turn some sort of strange green shade, for example. So for me personally, this kind of nice gold color was reasonably flattering to pretty much anybody, and I look terrible in a lot of things like bright colors. And then the blue was also near my face, and most people can wear blues. So it is important to think about that too if you're trying to decide between, these 2 are fairly similar, but it's like if you can wear pink, go for it. But if you can't wear pink, then you might want to rethink the color there, just simply to make the shawl more pleasant to wear in terms of how you look. And it's one of the things that took me a long time to learn, because my God, I've made some shawls that were stunning and I put them on and I was like, oh, scary.
But you obviously put a lot of thought into the placement of the colors. So I didn't want to change things too much, like substitution, without knowing more about it. And as I've never done anything like this before, I thought keep it easy for myself and just change the color of the yarn, and then I'm good. So thank you.
Absolutely. So we have a great question, and thank you, Sandra. That was a lot of really good commentary. Where will people be posting their images as they go along? So we have a number of different places where you can post your images. Oh, look, I accidentally put my thumb up. So we have a thread that's open in Ravelry. Now, a lot of us don't use Ravelry, so there's also our closed Facebook group. You can join us, and we have a pinned thread in the Facebook group. Actually, I think I have to go in and pin it, don't I, Wendy? But, you know, we'll have a thread there that you can post. And then you can also share them on Instagram on your own accounts. And you just want to hashtag it, hashtag Roman Villa Shawl, and then we'll be able to find them. Now, it's worth sharing them because, first of all, it's really fun to see other people's progress, but also because we are obsessed with giving out prizes in this KAL, this will give you entries in the KAL. And every time that you post a picture of your shawl and hashtag it, that gives you another entry. So for the people who really enjoy Instagram, that's a great way to do it. If you're not an Instagram person and you're a Facebook person, you will also be able to post, and I'll put a post up tonight on our main Facebook page, and you can post your images as comments on that post. You can go to our group, that sort of thing. So there's various different venues for you to go. And also, remember that you are more than welcome to ask me questions at any point as you're knitting this shawl, because I know there's a lot of really different things in here and some unusual techniques. They're not difficult, but they might be completely foreign. So feel free to ask. I will be popping in regularly and checking the Ravelry thread and the Facebook group. And if you need to message me on Instagram, feel free, because, you know, that's what this is all about, is knitting along together and having fun and hopefully learning a few new things along the way. So were there any more questions? Am I missing anything in the chat, Heather? I've got Heather shaking her head and Wendy nodding, and I'm like, I don't know which.
Would like to remind everybody that the next Zoom meeting is 2 weeks from tonight on Friday, March 4th at 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time.
Right. So what we'll do with that meeting is we're going to get a chance to share our progress, but then I'm also going to give you some more tips and tricks for further portions of the shawl and tell you a little bit more about some of the inspirations, like some of the history that you can get in there. So we'll have more tips and tricks and more prizes, because, you know, I can't resist them. So is there any other questions before we end for the evening? Because I know we've reached the end of our hour. If not, well, then what I'm going to do is wish everybody happy knitting and hope you all have as much fun with this as I did in designing it, because I will admit to doing an awful lot of chortling and making gleeful noises. So thank you all for spending an hour with us here on Friday night, and we look forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
You're so welcome.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So you were using your long needle the whole time?
No, actually, I have various samples set up on different needles with different cable lengths. So this one was smart, and this one was not smart because it's really long.
So is it wise to have one shorter round needle in the
main part of the shawl? You can get away with a not as long a needle. I think I used a 24-inch for that part of the shawl because it only ever gets to be 100 stitches wide at its widest point. If you're having trouble with the mosaic being a bit tight, then what you can do is use a longer cord on an interchangeable needle, because it'll give you more space to move your stitches along, and literally the weight of the knitting will help pull it out a bit. Some people will tend to make those little strands when they skip stitches really tight, and so you may as well let gravity help you. Otherwise, for that part of the shawl, you really don't need a long one. When you put the border on it, this is actually the cable that I used, and it is a longer cable because then you can get those 462 stitches on there. So that is a long border to do, but luckily it's not too deep.
And you're suggesting a 3.75. millimeter.
Yeah, or whatever it takes for you to get the gauge, because of course we all knit different. I tend to kind of knit right smack in the middle in terms of, whether you're a tight or a loose knitter. So that was the needle that worked for me. But I know that a few other people that have swatched, one person had to go up 2 full sizes on needles just to begin to approach the same gauge, but she's a much tighter knitter than I am. And then I'm sure there's some people who have to drop down. Like, I find it absolutely fascinating. Orenburg lace knitters will use like quad 0 needles. And I'm like, but the stitch is X big. The reason why is that they're very fast knitters and they knit with a very loose tension. So they're using these teeny tiny needles, and I have to use a much different needle in order to get the right gauge when I knit those sort of shawls. So yeah, great question.
Can
And then
we
later
look
on,
back at the recording that you've made? Is it going to be held
Yeah.
somewhere?
how do you
Yeah,
do-
so what we'll do is we'll make it available. We should be sending an email out to everybody who's registered with the website there so that you can get the recording and you can review it again later. Because I know that it's kind of like, oh my God, she said a bunch of stuff, and then you want to go back and look at it later on.